This morning, we're going to be continuing in our series, The Should Life. And if you were with us last week, we kicked off the series, The Should Life. And literally over the 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about what we're calling the shoulds. And this is how we've defined it. This is the running definition that we'll use all throughout this series. The shoulds are the expectations we place on ourselves, on others, and on God. And last week, we talked a lot about some of these expectations that we put on ourselves. We called them like I should statements, like this exhaustive, never-ending list of things that we feel like we should do. Now, I know last week was difficult for some of us because some of us, we like to consider ourselves goal-oriented individuals. And so to talk about how the shoulds can be a negative things in our life, we didn't like that because we don't look at it that way. We look at the shoulds and think of, well, these are the things that propel me and motivate me to grow, to do things that maybe I wouldn't do if I didn't put these expectations on myself. And so I want to be perfectly clear, like this whole series, that message last week, it wasn't about not having goals. It's about assessing the motivation of those goals. Like what is driving the expectations that you have in your life? What is driving the things that you feel like you should do? Like just for the sake of just our time, there's a few examples. Let's take working out, for example. I'll just talk about myself. I don't like to work out. Who's with me? Yes. Who's with me but didn't want to raise their hand? I don't like to work out. You know what I like to do? I like to hang out with my family and watch movies and eat food I know that I shouldn't eat. Like, that's what I like to do. Working out is not one of those things, but I do work out at times. Usually they're the times when my clothes start to fit a little bit tighter than they did a couple months beforehand. Mostly I'm working out because I feel like I should. But then something happened. I turned 40. And guess what? I go to the doctor, my blood pressure is up, my weight is more than it should be, and I could tell myself, like, it's not a big deal, like, I've got plenty of years left in my life. But the truth is, I don't want just any old years. Like, I want great years. Like, I want to see my kids grow up. I want to walk my kids down the aisle. Lord willing, when my kids have kids someday, like, I want to play with my grandkids. And I mean, like, I want to play with them, not watch them play. I want to go on hikes with them. I want to go skiing with them. I want to go fishing with them. Like, I want to do all of these things. And because I value those things, because that's what I want in my life, I work out. Not because I should, but because of what I want. There's a difference. Let's take another example. Maybe some of you came into the new year, or maybe it wasn't a New Year's resolution, but you're like, hey, I'm going to have a dedicated, quiet time with God. This is something I'm going to prioritize and have every single day of my life. And we do it, many of us do it, because we feel like we should. And that's very different than doing it because you have a heartfelt desire to pursue God and to get to know Him. And so, because you want those things, you're prioritizing the things in your life that lead to the things that you want. Goals aren't bad, but it's all about the motivation. And that's what we want to get to the heart of. Like, what is motivating it? If it's not being motivated out of a desire to pursue something or to get to know someone better, like in the case of our relationship with God, then often those shoulds in our lives will only end up leading to guilt, frustration, and disappointment. And that's not what any of us want in our lives, but the reality is because of the way we live our lives and because of the expectations we put on ourselves, it's the thing that continually keeps popping up. This morning, we're going to continue, like I said, talking about the shoulds, but we're going to move beyond talking about these I should statements to another way in our lives where we leverage the shoulds. And what we're going to talk about is the way that we leverage shoulds when it comes to other people. These statements that start with this word, you should. Now, all of us are really good at this statement. Because we have all these things like, well, you should go clean your room, or you should stop by the supermarket on your way home and get those things that I told you. Like, you should statements are these things in our lives that we're just really comfortable leveraging. We're really comfortable using. And that's what we're going to talk about, because there's so much to these you should statements that we need to unpack. And we need to come to wrestle and realize how they play out in our lives. And there's so much to you should that we're actually going to spend the next 2 weeks specifically talking about these two words. Now, maybe this is your first, you showed up this morning and you're like, I have no idea what this whole thing is, the should life. I mentioned this last week, but this whole series is based off a book that was written by my friend Todd called Should Happens. And we told you guys last week that we had some books that were available. You guys were so excited about picking up some of these books that we completely sold out in first service. So when I said it second service, y'all made me a liar because you bought too many books first service. So we got some more books here. And if you didn't grab a book this last weekend, know that you can pick one up in the back when service is over. There's a table back there. They're $10. And here's the cool thing about this book. When I was talking to Todd about doing this series and kind of he asked, would we consider selling these books? He said, for every book that you sell, for every one book, one kid would get to eat for 2 weeks. They would provide food for them in the developing part of the world. And so last week we sold over 50 books, and those are over 50 kids that get nutritional meals because you picked this up. And not only is that a good cause, but this is a great asset and a resource as we continue to walk through this series together. So if you didn't grab one of these books, go ahead and pick one up after the service. Now these words, you should pops up in all sorts of ways in our lives, right? Like they come out everywhere. They often show themselves in the job descriptions, if you will, that we have for other people in our lives. Now, the thing is, we all get job descriptions, right? Like we all understand. Many of us work in a place where we were given a job description. A job description is a great thing because it really tells us what we're supposed to be doing. It tells us how we win at our job. And like my role here, I mentioned I report to the elders. The elders, for me, have given me a job description. And I love it because, again, it helps me to know that I'm hitting the targets. It helps me know that I'm winning. Like there's comfort in job descriptions. And the issue here isn't in the way that job descriptions play out when it comes to our workplaces. The struggle is the job descriptions that we have for people in our lives. Like all of us have job descriptions. All of us have an idea of all the things the people in our lives should be doing. Now the problem is, a lot of the times we fail to tell people what those job expectations are. We fail to tell people what we expect of them. And the other reality is, even if we do tell them, often they lead to the same reality as our I should statements. They lead to guilt, they lead to frustration, they lead to disappointment. And we see this play out in all of our significant relationships in our lives. In our marriage relationships. Like we'll say things like, hey, or we don't say things, but like, when I'm talking, your job is to listen. And when you're talking, my job is to do what I'm continuing to do and pretend like I'm listening. Let's be honest. You have that expectation. We have it with our workplace. You should do everything that I don't want to do. I might not tell you that. You're just supposed to magically know the things that I don't want to do and do them. And when you don't do them, I get frustrated. We have these sort of things play out with our kids. If you're a kid, well, all of us are kids here at some level, right? If you have a parent, at some point you've said this expectation: let me live my life. If you have teenagers at home, that's what they're feeling. Let me live my life. That's the expectation they have for you. Parents, you know the expectation we have for our kids? Let me live your life. Let me help you make the right decisions. I get it. Like I have expectations. I'll talk a little bit about later with my kids. We see it when it comes to our friends. Like you should always offer to drive me to the airport. And when I move, you should be over there with a truck to help me unload everything. But at the same time, when you move or when you go to the airport, please don't call me. People are like, oh. You have expectations for me. Hey, make sure every week you have a great sermon. A sermon that's challenging, but not too challenging. A sermon that has a great point, but not so great of a point that I feel guilty that I have to do it. Like, be funny, but don't tell jokes. Like, don't make it a whole message about jokes. Now, we can laugh at some of these expectations, but the reality is they exist. We all have expectations of other people in our lives. And when we leverage these you should sort of statements, it often leads to guilt. And it doesn't often lead to some of the results that we want for people in our lives. Now, the Bible has a great story of what it looks like to live this you should life. And that story is found in the book of Luke. Luke is one of the books that tell us about the life and the work of Jesus. And Luke is one of my favorite gospel writers. I love it. Does anyone know who wrote the book of Luke? Wow. Yes, Luke. Yeah, Luke is credited to being the gospel writer. Now, Luke was a physician. He's a doctor, which means he's incredibly attentive to details. You would always hope your doctors are attentive to details. And that's one of the things that I love about the Gospel of Luke, because you see all of these details. He's included so much important information about the life of Jesus, and we see it play out in his account of it. And as we look here in Luke, beginning in chapter 10, we see some of these details. Now, Jesus is traveling with his closest followers. We call them the disciples. And he comes to a town, and when he gets to this town, he goes and visits a home that has two sisters in it. And this is what we read beginning in Luke chapter 10. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. So the setup here is pretty simple. This story, if you've been around church, you've heard this story before. If you're new to church, you can quickly kind of understand what's happening. Jesus comes to town. He enters into this house. When he gets there, Martha is busy. Martha is working at all of the things that she needs to get done to properly host Jesus. Her sister Mary has made the decision simply to sit at Jesus' feet. That as Jesus and his disciples, as they come in, as they settle in, she chooses to sit down and listen to what he has to say. Listen to the stories that he has to share. Listen to the wisdom he has. Listen to this calling of what it means to live this grace-filled life. And as all of this is happening, Martha is running around doing the sort of things that you would expect someone to do to host someone. And Martha, you know, is just busy because we're told, this is what we read. But Martha was distracted. Mary's chosen to sit at Jesus' feet to listen to what he has to teach, to listen to what he has to say. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Martha is thinking about all of the things that she needs to do. She's probably thinking about making dinner. She's probably thinking about straightening up the house, making sure it's presentable to guests, though, right? But not just any guest, that her home is presentable for Jesus. And I totally get this, because if we got a neighbor coming over our house, I'm going to probably pick up my kids' toys. If we have friends coming over our house, I'll probably clean the kitchen and the bathroom because that's how much I care about our friends. But if Jesus was to show up at our house, it would be a full scrub down. Clean the floor, wipe the baseboards, clean out the kitchen cabinets. Everything would have to be pristine because after all, this is the Lord of Lords. It's the King of Kings. This is our Savior, our Messiah. There is so much to do with such an important guest. And so Martha is busy taking care of all of it. She's doing everything all by herself. And she's not happy about it. She's not happy that Mary is not helping her. Mary, in her mind, is being completely lazy, sitting there doing nothing. Mary should be doing something. Mary should be helping with the cooking, helping with the cleaning, helping with the preparations, helping with the serving. This list of Martha, these you shoulds, are things that she expected Mary to do. And on top of this whole thing, on top of all of these you shoulds that Mary isn't doing, it's pretty clear that Martha is frustrated with Jesus. That she's frustrated with Jesus because Jesus doesn't seem to get or understand that she's being left to do all of the work herself. This is what she says. She came to him, to Jesus, and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself?" Literally, she's implying, Jesus, you should care. You should care that I'm doing all this work by myself. Tell her to help me. Tell her to do something. Tell her she should help. Tell her she shouldn't leave me to do it by myself. Like, this verse is like the perfect embodiment of what it means to live by a you should sort of list. That Martha thinks that she knows what is best. She thinks she knows what her sister should be doing. She thinks she knows the things that Jesus should be doing. Now, the other thing that's so fascinating to me about this verse is it illustrates wonderfully the reality, not just for Martha, but for all of us, of what comes of our you should sort of list. The reality is when we have these shoulds, when we put these lists and we put these expectations on other people, the result, what we're ultimately getting at, is they are things that benefit us. They are things so often that make us better, that fulfill our purposes. And that's what Martha's doing. Notice she's not asking for Mary to help because at all, like, it's beneficial to Mary. She never says that. She's asking for help because she doesn't want to do it by herself. She feels like she's having to carry the load, and so she wants someone else to jump in and to carry the load with her. And one of the things that we love to say as Christians, we love to quote this verse. You know, you give it to everyone when they graduate. Some of you put it on your bumper stickers or your license plate frames. We love this verse. Jeremiah 29, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." We love to quote this verse, but in practice, in our lives, we live it out completely different. This is how we live it out. This is how Martha lived it out. "For I know the plans I have for you," declared Martha. "Plans to prosper me, plans not to harm me, plans to give me hope and a future." When you leverage your you shoulds on other people, you're ultimately saying the same thing. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares, fill in your name. "Plans to prosper you," or plans to prosper me and not to harm me. Plans to give me hope and a future. You see, the reality and what we have to understand is when we live by the shoulds, when we lob our expectations on other people, what we're really trying to do is to play God. We fool ourselves into thinking that in some way we are in charge of someone else's life. Like, think about this for a second. Martha is in the room with Jesus. Like, Jesus is right there in the same room, and she still thinks that she somehow knows what's better for her sister. That she still thinks that somehow she knows how her sister should respond. And listen to what Jesus says to her. "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Jesus is like, look, Martha, you've somehow completely seemed to miss the point. Like, you think that you know what's best for Mary. She thought she knew what Mary should be doing, but Jesus makes it clear that she doesn't. That Mary has actually chosen what is best. And it would have been better for Martha to choose the same thing. It would have been better for Martha to prioritize being present with the Lord who was in her home instead of running around, following after not just her list of I should, but sharing with Martha her list, or Mary her list of you should. You see, the truth is, a lot of us find ourselves in Martha's shoes. Like I talked about, we have our list of you shoulds, and we use them. We use them in our marriages, with our coworkers, with our kids, with our families. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't things that we should expect from people in their lives. Like, I do believe that there are good shoulds. Like, if someone is battling an addiction, if you're battling an addiction and you're here with us this morning, quite honestly, there are things that you should do. And if you're in an unhealthy relationship, or if you have mounting financial debt, like, the truth is, there are things, good things, that you should do. But what I want us to recognize, that for so many of us who like to use those statements on other people, that far more often than not, they are better at inducing guilt than they are at motivating change. Which, of course, then has to raise this question. How do we get others to do the things, to do what they should do? Which is a great question. This is such an important question. It's a question we should ask. And Paul, one of the writers of the New Testament, Paul kind of gives us a framework on how we can answer about it. How do we go about helping people do the things that they should do? This is what he says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility value others above yourself. These words right here, value others above yourself, is the key. Like, that's the key to unlocking some of this, of helping other people in our lives do some of the things that we know that they should be doing, because these are the things that are good for them. Now, I want you just to think for a second about the power of that statement. Value others above yourself. Like, think about how much different the world would be if we really lived that out. Like, if we valued others above ourselves. Now, the truth is, some of us would have no problem with this statement. Like, we'd have no problem living lives. We'd have no problem valuing others above ourselves, as long as we got to pick who those other people were, right? Like, we don't mind valuing, like, kind people above ourselves. Like, we don't mind valuing our loved ones above ourselves, our kids above ourselves. We don't mind valuing other Seahawks fans above ourselves. But, like, what if it was like a Patriot fan? Yeah. But notice, there's no qualifier here for Paul. You don't get to choose. You need to value other people as greater than yourself. Now, this word here, value, that's on the other end there, that's the Greek word hagaiomai. And it's literally used elsewhere to denote money. It's to denote some sort of monetary value. And it's fascinating to me. Paul is literally saying, in humility, put a price on someone else. Like, put a price tag on someone else's relationship. Now, that's one of those things that maybe sounds a bit icky, but the truth is, we do it all the time. Like, we size people up really, really quickly. Like, we put a price, we put value on people really, really quickly. We have no problem putting a price on a person. The problem we have is putting that price higher than the price we placed on our own life. And my guess is, for so many of us, when we look at the people in our lives, maybe with the exception of a select few, we are really good at valuing someone else at just a little bit below where we value ourselves. And that's the reality of the world that we live in. We see it all over the place. And I know that there's some of you who are here this morning who battle with your own self-worth, who you've gone through life and you have been marginalized. You have been sort of set aside. Like, you have not been shown the value that you deserve. And if that's you, if that's where you're at this morning, what I want you to know is that Jesus loves you, that he gave his life for you because he values you so much, that he wants you to find your way back to home. He wants you to find your way back to God. Now, the other reality is, for some of us in this room this morning who are Christians, we need to acknowledge the reality that we have been part of the problem. We have been part of the epidemic that has been played out in our society because we haven't lived out Paul's words, because we haven't chosen to prioritize and to value other people more than ourselves. And because we don't do that, you know what happens? We get stuck in the shoulds. But here's what I want you to know. If you're willing to prioritize the people in your lives, if you're willing to value them greater than yourselves, then I promise you what will happen is your shoulds will minimize, which is a good thing. And I promise you, your relationships will improve. See, the truth is, many people in our lives have felt the brunt of our you should lists. Whether we've stated what those expectations are or whether we've never stated what those expectations are, like the people in our lives, often the people that we love the most have felt the brunt of those expectations. And for many of you, maybe that reality has led to a fracturing in your relationship with that person. And if it hasn't yet, I'm going to be honest, at some point, if you continue to live this way, it will eventually fracture and break the relationships that you value most. And that's not what you want. That's not what any of us want. It's not what we want for you. And so we want to help you move past this. We want to help you experience change, and you need to do something. Like if you're going to begin to value people as greater than yourselves, if you're going to begin to move past your you should list, then something needs to change. And so this morning, we want to help you do something. Now, I recognize that we can't just snap our fingers and overnight, like all of your perspective and all of your relationships will change. Like we can't just snap our fingers and like tomorrow you will value everyone greater than yourselves. That's not going to happen. But the truth is, we can intentionally make a decision to begin to prioritize one relationship, to begin to prioritize one person and start valuing them as greater than ourselves. And I would suggest the best person to pick is that person in your life that you have placed the most shoulds on. The person in your life where you have expected the most, whether it's been things that you have stated or things that you have never stated to them. And so we want to do that right now. And in just a second, the band is going to come out and they're going to play a song. And as they're playing that song over the next 4, 5, 6 minutes, I want to invite you, as they're singing, to come forward. And up front here, there are 2 tables with half sheets of paper on. And there's some pencils on these tables. And as they're singing and as you felt led, I want to invite you to come forward and to literally grab one of these pieces of paper. And on that table, I want you to write the name of an individual. And that name on that piece of paper is representative of the job description that you have for that person in your life. And I'm going to be honest, as long as there's a job description for someone else in your life, you're not valuing them the way that God values them. And so I'm going to ask that you would come forward and you would literally write on this piece of paper the name of the people or person that you expect the most of. I'm writing my kids. Because I'm going to be honest, I have a list of shoulds. I want them to love the Lord. I want them to meet the perfect husband. I want them to be good contributors to society. But I also want them to go to a really good college, one that has a football team that dad can support. I'm being serious. And I want them to get a good job. Not just a job that provides, but a job that dad could brag about. My daughters are doctors or surgeons or some world-changing profession. And I also want them never to embarrass me in public. But at the same time, I want them to be perfectly okay with allowing me to embarrass them all the time in public. And even as I've been thinking about this morning, as I've been thinking about this series, as I've been thinking about this message, I'm recognizing more and more how many expectations that I put on my kids. Things that are just going to lead to a fractured, broken relationship with them. And I don't want that. My wife doesn't want that. And so we need to let it go. And there is someone in your life, some job description that you have for someone in your life that you need to let go of as well. And so as the band's singing, I'm going to invite you to come forward and to write on these pieces of paper that person's name. I'm going to ask you to crumble up that piece of paper and throw it in the trash can right here. Like a very simple and symbolic act of letting go. Because here's the reality. God has plans for that person, whoever that person is. God has plans for my kids that precede my own. He has plans for the person in your life that precede your own. So why don't we trust what God is doing? Why don't we trust that the value he places on them is far greater than we could ever do ourselves? And what if we were willing to take up our job descriptions, take our shoulds, and throw them away, and instead choose to love them and support them? Not for what they should be, but because of who God says they are. So I had this great idea. You can have a seat. I had this great idea. I wanted us to take all of these job descriptions that we have for other people in our lives and fill up this bucket and then just burn it. Right? Because it's one thing to throw it away, but it's an entirely different thing to torch it forever. But there's fire codes and all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to burn mine. No, it's okay. We've tested this. We've got it. And here's a promise I'm going to make to you. After church, outside, in the rain, where I can't possibly burn anything else down, I'm going to torch this bucket. So that we would be free of these job descriptions that we put on other people forever. That you would lean in and trust that God has got a plan that is better than your own for these people's lives. Guys, thank you so much for being here this weekend. Just a reminder, if this is your first time or you're newer here, we'd love to connect with you over at Next right after the service. Our ministry teams know if you've got kids that you can leave them there, and we look forward to chatting with you soon. Thank you so much. Have a great week.